My name is Michael Sladek. I'm a filmmaker and the New York consultant for SAG-Indy. Before we speak to our guests today, I was asked to let you know that the foundation has set up a COVID relief fund in order to support thousands of union performers who are going through tough times right now. Since March, thanks to your donations, the foundation has given over $6.1 million in emergency aid to more than 6,600 performers and their families. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and need help, please ask. And if you can help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you for your support. And now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the director of Silk Road, Tiller Russell, and actor Darrell Britt-Gibson. Welcome, Tiller and Darrell. Thank you for doing this, and congratulations on the film. I'm sure you're doing a lot of Q&As these days, trying to spread the word about the production, about the release of the movie. Is it out far and wide at this point?
It drops on, well, first of all, thank you so much, Michael, for having us and SAG-AFTRA Foundation and everybody who's joining us this evening. We're really stoked that you're all here and grateful for your time. Yeah, the movie drops on Friday. It's in, I don't know, 100 plus theaters, wherever theaters are actually still in existence in the world. And it's also on, all your platforms from Amazon to Apple to, pay-per-view, Comcast, all that kind of good stuff.
Very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this. So if you will, Tiller, can you tell us what the origin of the project was, where it all started?
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody who spends much of his time kind of obsessing on crime stories and true crime stories in particular, this one caught my attention really right from the jump. I was off shooting a crime doc, and I remember the day after Ross Ulbricht was arrested in the sci-fi section of the Glen Park Library. And I just remember vividly kind of opening the newspaper and thinking and it was just the top line of reporting. There was very little detail about who Ross Ulbricht was and sort of what had happened. And it was all this kind of mysterious dark web, voodoo, so to speak. And I just thought, man, there is a person behind that and there is a story behind that. And then several years later, a Rolling Stone journalist by the name of David Kushner had written a brilliant, what I thought was kind of humanist portrait and portrayal of Ross Ulbricht. And that really ended up being the springboard for the movie.
So you had already been kind of tracking the story it's stuck in your head years before.
Yeah, it was funny. I had kind of obsessed about it really from the jump. And so by the time, producers had called me and they were like, we got this Rolling Stone article. What do you know about it? I'm like, I know everything. I've been fiending out to this, and because it just struck me as a story that was kind of foundational in its implications for, the drug war and the drug game and the injection of Bitcoin into the zeitgeist, and just an interesting and sort of surreal cast of characters that were pinwheeling around it. So
are you saying that you had producers that called you and you just happened to know about it, or were you pursuing that story?
No, I was not. I mean, I had been tracking it thinking, okay, maybe it's a documentary, maybe it's a feature film, maybe it's a limited series. So I had been clocking it along the way, but there wasn't enough kind of information for me to know one way or another. And then that Rolling Stone article was published, was optioned, and producers who knew me and knew my work thought it was something that might resonate, and so called me about it. And I was just so passionate about it. But the interesting thing about it was, at the time that article came out and when I began sort of, the first stab at writing, the whole other half of the story hadn't broken yet. The fact that there was, the character that's played by Jason Clarke and, and sort of Darrell's half of the movie, so to speak. None of that had come into the public consciousness yet, because the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office were very deliberately sitting on the story. But I knew people from my work in crime, basically, that called me and they were like, man, wait till you hear the other half of the story. This is some crazy shit.
Interesting. So I don't know if you can speak to this, since it sounds like it was already licensed before you kind of came on the scene for the film, but Do you know what the process was for licensing the story itself? Was it just the article? Was it life rights? Did it matter?
It ended up. It's a great question, and it's an interesting kind of complicated one, and one that I end up dealing with a lot. Whether it's on making nonfiction films or making a narrative project like this that's based on a true story. So at the time, Rolling Stone writers were able to keep the rights to their own stories. It's since changed with the ownership of MRC purchasing Rolling Stone, so that now it's actually MRC that owns the content to all of it. So you have to do a deal with them. In this case, it was the journalist himself, and then you have to credit Rolling Stone. Then the next sort of piece and that was the launch pad. So that was like, okay, we have a piece of IP upon which to base the project. And I think there were any number of pieces of IP that were out there that could have been, a springboard for it. This was a particularly good one because in the coverage of it, it had Ross's family and his ex-girlfriend now, Julia V, who's played by Alexandra Shipp in the movie. She actually came on and became a consultant, right? Because I knew that there was this, obligation in some way or another to try to get as close as possible to at least the spiritual truth of the movie, if not the literal, to the story, if not the literal factual kind of documentary version of it. And so being able to bring in those collaborators, and then it became a question, as oftentimes happens in these crime stories, is, okay, is Ross Ulbricht a public figure? If he is a public figure, do you therefore not need his life rights? And, you can imagine the legal wrangling behind the scenes, figuring all that stuff out.
But coming from docs, it must have been a little bit easier for you to wrap your brain around.
Well, I sort of jokingly, say like, I sort of thought of myself as like kind of a gangster whisperer, and so like I'm used to like hanging out with crooks and cops and informants, and like the character that Darrell's character was based on is somebody who was somebody that I knew that was a long-term informant for a federal agent and knew very closely. And so I remember when I first talked to Darrell about it, for example, I was like, hey, Darrell, there's a guy that this is based on. He's a real guy. It's tangential to the story in question, but it's drawn from people that I know in a world that I know. So use this as a resource to the extent that it's valuable to you. Wow. And it was interesting, Darrell's process. I wonder what your feeling was, Darrell, in terms of kind of, walking into a character like that and you finding the authenticity of yourself within that character. How did you approach it?
Say one more time, TR, because
I guess what was your process entering into this character? I remember when you and I first talked, you were like, dude, I'm from Baltimore, dude, I am the sneaker man. Like, and so there was a lot of kind of you that was inherently baked into it. So how do you bring a piece of yourself, to a character like this?
For me personally, I try to bring a little piece of myself to any role that I play, because I just think that sort of capturing the essence of a character is going to have to include you bringing a little bit of your own essence to it, because the baseline for any character that you're playing is going to be that we're both human beings, right? So how do we start there and then build the house up from that? So in terms of the Rayford of it, I think that there's a lot of, I feel like there was a lot of internal conflict with Rayford in terms of wanting to help this person who doesn't really treat him the way that you should treat somebody that you're asking for help. So being caught in that, place, but also thinking about Rayford as being maybe somebody who, because of his line of work, if you want to call it that, might not have a lot of people that he can, even have real interactions with. So it felt like there was a part of that was a bit of a conflict. That's like, do I want to help this person? But at the same time, like, as a human being, like, I search for this, he searches for that human connection. So maybe even though it seems like not the most beneficial to his spirit relationship, it's still a human connection. So really trying to dive into who Rayford is and sort of the backstory of Rayford. And as we spoke earlier, TR, when I was saying about for me as an actor, what I do is my work is I really base my work on 10 minutes. And what I call the 10-minute thing for me personally is the 5 minutes before you meet a character, before you meet my character, and the 5 minutes after that character leaves the screen. So what were they doing 5 minutes before, and what are they going to be doing 5 minutes after they leave? And that's my 10 minutes. And I do all the work there so that when I'm thrown into the character and the role, everything else flows.
It was so fascinating to watch you work because it felt like it was literally from like take one, moment one on set, so fully formed and so fully lived in. And I loved, you did this thing right from the jump that was, it's like you're stuck in a relationship where you're smarter than the other person, but the power dynamic is fucked up. So like there's only so much you can do with it. And the kind of amused yet kind of frustrated, like you did this very complicated thing that made me just feel like, ooh, like that's where my eye is going. I'm watching that guy.
Yeah, no, that was such an important thing. And also, like, you know, being able to, when you work with somebody like Jason, it you know, it draws something out of you. And just the dynamic of me and him as human beings, just interacting with him, like, you know, I'm meeting him before I shot. Like, I think I came to set, y'all were filming, I came to set, I met Jason for like 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, I was like, oh, okay, cool. I know how this is gonna go. Like, I already know, I'm like, get me back to the hotel, because I'm ready. I gotta do that work. Like, I already know the work that I'm about to do when it's time for me to be on set and work with Jason.
How do you, so let me ask you this, because I've always been curious about this, is, you know, he's such a beast and he's just like so kind of intense and like, you know, he's a character. How do you keep your, from being either intimidated, from being bold in some way or another, like you instantaneously were able to like hit the ball back and forth with him. How do you walk in with somebody like that and confidently hit the ball right back at him at 100 miles an hour?
I was my parents raised me to be, you know, as confident as I need to be, as assured of myself as I need to be. So I don't walk on set and ever fear, you know, this idea of like, oh, I'm standing across from insert, you know, Jason Clarke or Frances McDormand or, you know, Daniel Kaluuya. I mean, I look at it's if I'm there, I'm supposed to be there. And so the sort of, you know, nerves or whatever they may be, they're an excited one. It's like, I'm excited to be here. I'm not like intimidated or afraid of a moment. I'm just excited. It's like going to play a game of basketball or something where it's like you get those pregame jitters and you're like, oh, like it's exciting. Like I'm supposed to be here. So like, let's do this. And just sort of like being able to lean in and feel the energy of Jason and sort of who he is and his spirit and his being and being able to tap into that. And, you know, really meeting people at that human level and just speaking to, you know, because somebody like Jason who's done a million things, when I'm on set with Jason, like I'm talking about a sport, we're talking about everything but acting, right? So then it's just us talking and then just getting to know each other on a personal level, because there can sort of be that thing where you get in there with these, you know, heavyweights and it's sort of like everybody's asking them, oh, well, this, and how did it feel to do that? And I'm like, yo, so what do you think about the game last night? You know, like what do you think about that? Or like, how do you feel about like lunch today? Like, I don't know if I liked it. Like, you know what I mean? And then that is going to create a relationship that, you know, not only produces something hopefully special on screen, but lasts, you know, way beyond when we finish filming.
Yeah. Well, it gives a depth to the performance that I can imagine those 5 minutes on either side. And that's what I felt. I was like, dude, these guys are running away with this movie. Like, where's that movie go? I want to see that movie.
Write it, TR, write it.
All right, man. Be careful what you wish for.
Tiller and Darrell, can you speak about how the cast came to this project? Were you just choosing folks and having them come in, or were you auditioning? What was the process?
It was an interesting kind of protracted process. You know, when I had first written the script, you know, a few years ago, I literally sort of the focus at the moment was on casting Ross Ulbricht. Like, who is it that's going to play Ross? And I literally probably met with nearly every amazing young, you know, leading man in the or up and coming leading man in the age range. And it was so fascinating to sit with one these amazing young actor after another. And I went through so many people, and it wasn't until I got to Nick Robinson that he had this vulnerability to him and this sort of sweetness and softness where I was just like, dude, I like this guy. I like being at the table with him. And I knew that, like, with a character who is, narcissistic, going from a naive place to a dark place, that you had to have somebody, hopefully, that audiences could hook in with at the beginning to go to that dark place. And so once I met with Nick, I was like, that's the guy. And similarly with Jason, I love him and just have been such a fan of him for so long that, and there were many different iterations of what this movie could have been. And then when Jason sort of said, that's it, I'm doing this, I want this, I was like, that is my guy. And then it was just one beautiful kind of fortuitous, the people just came to light. Darrell came to light, Paul came to light, Alexandra Shipp came to light, and Katie Azelton and Jimmy Simpson, and they kind of found the material and sort of said, hey, like, this is me, I'm doing this. And when you have people that are that clear and confident about their ownership of the material, I was like, yes, these are the people, so it just felt like a gift.
So when you say came to light, do you mean you were seeing their performances, or they were getting?
There was a range. There was everything. There were tapes, there were self-tapes, there were calls, there were lists of people that kind of got put together. But my it may sound silly, but I do believe that there's some amount of kind of fate to this whole thing, where either the casting director or an agent would call, or just like looking at a bunch of people. I remember vividly looking at and it was, some of them were self-tapes, some of them were big stars, some of them whatever, and I remember like locking in to Darrell's face, looking at the the casting screen, and I was like, man, that moment in Three Billboards, when he is talking about the billboard, and he's like, well, what's it advertising? And he's like, something inscrutable. I forget what the line is, but there was just this like sophistication to Darrell in that moment that was directly applicable to, oh, you're smarter than this cop. And there was this thing there where I was like, this guy's got so much going on behind his eyes and in his like complexity as a human being, that I was like, I'm not interested in anybody else. Put me on the phone with Darrell. And Darrell and I got on, and Darrell basically was like, dude, like, I'm from Baltimore. I am a sneakerhead. Like, this is like, I know this. And it was so convincing and so weirdly effortless that it suddenly became, I'm sitting there pulling my hair out, freaking out who it's going to be. And then you talk to the person and you're like, it's Darrell, clearly,
I'm curious about Paul Hauser and his kind of little asides and monologues. And was that scripted, or were you letting him just sort of riff?
Well, Paul's great. I mean, that guy just, from Eastwood to Spike to just everybody, anything that he appears in, he just steals it. He's just so talented and so smart and charming and funny and unexpected. And early on, we had these conversations because so much of the film takes place, in this, in the chat logs and in, text messages and whatever. And so there's a lot that's text driven. And I remember when Paul, and I forget whose idea it was, I'll credit Paul, always credit other people with the good ideas. But Paul, I think, was like, what if he's a mumbler, dude? What if he, like, all the stuff that like he should be typing, he's mumbling to himself? And I'm like, that is hilarious. And that way we don't have to read shit on the screen. And so that combination of those two things. And then we hit on the other funny thing, which was, in point of fact, the real life guy that's based on, Curtis Clarke Green, had a Chihuahua. That was his pet. And I was like, okay, but Chihuahuas are going to be yappy. What are they going to do there? And like Paul and I were like, dude, what if it's a ferret? Like, we'll give you a ferret and then you can mumble. And then as soon as he had that, he was like, don't talk to me, I know what to do. And I was like, just run with it, man.
So in terms of things like that, right? I mean, obviously you have this disclaimer at the beginning that this is all true except for the things that you changed, which is a great disclaimer for any movie based on something that's true. And I am curious, like, dealing with a true story, where do you draw the line? How do you I mean, you obviously have to compact things and for time and for characters, but what's your guiding light for something like this?
It's a huge, complicated question that I think, you have to keep reassessing constantly all the way throughout. And so with this, I didn't have access to Ross Ulbricht early on. When the article first came out, he was locked up in MCC New York, awaiting trial and appeals and sort of all of the, the wheels of justice, so to speak. And I wrote him a letter, but I knew his lawyers were never going to let me get to him. Rightly, they shouldn't have, for fear of jeopardizing the case. And so right from the get-go, I knew, okay, if I'm gonna sort of figure out who this guy is, I'm going to have to use the skill set that I use in making documentaries like Night Stalker, or Operation Odessa, or whatever, where I'm speaking to everybody who knows him. I'm going through the record, like, for example, all of the voiceover that's in the movie that Nick speaks, literally 99% of that is drawn from Ross's his public posts as Dread Pirate Roberts on the Silk Road website, or his journal entries, which were on his laptop, which was confiscated after his arrest, or in the chat logs, encrypted or otherwise, back and forth between him and Nob, or him and Chronic Pain, or any of the other characters. And so there was access to his voice in a way, while there wasn't access to him. And so I felt, okay, there is kind of a ethical obligation to be as spiritually true to that character as possible, right? This is somebody that's sitting in the pen looking at double life plus 40 without the possibility of parole. So I don't want it to be arbitrary. I want it to be as close as possible. Then with like Darrell's half of the movie, with the Jason Clarke half of the movie, there are interesting sort of fictional liberties that are taken, in the sense of there were multiple corrupt cops that were trying to bust Ross or fleece the Bitcoin from him. And so those characters ended up getting composited into a single character, which is Jason's character, Rick Bowden. And, as I was saying earlier, vis-a-vis Darrell's character, I have spent a lot of time with narcs, with informants, with crooks or whatever. So I have kind of a knowledge of how those relationships work, and the kind of psychologies and hustles and verbiage and whatever. And so that stuff is drawn from real relationships and real people, but it's grafted on to the story. So it's an interesting mix. And that's why the disclaimer at the top, right? Because it's disingenuous to say this story is true. Like there is a bunch of shit we made up. So you need to acknowledge that,
And there most of the time there is. So to that point, so from one of the audience members who apparently is named Santa Claus, is wondering, they are wondering what happened to the DEA supervisor who refused to listen to the agent's case.
Were there any ramifications for not having listened to the case? I mean, at the end of the day, what happens is oftentimes the feds kind of close ranks, right? And what happened in Ross's trial, for example, is none of the information about the corruption and the ripoff of the Bitcoins, all that stuff, even though everybody knew about it, DEA knew about it, U.S. Attorney's Office knew about it, none of that stuff was made public during Ross's trial, because once the sort of wheels of justice are turning to grind somebody up, they very deftly clamp down on that. And if you'll look at for those that are interested in kind of sifting through the historical record, there's very little biographical info about the crooked cops that were involved. They've really, they locked that down. So it required, to make it lived in and relatable, it required kind of building it out and making it, alive and intimate and familiar.
So Darrell, and I should remind everyone, please send your any more questions in through the chat. But Darrell, do you, you've had quite a busy year with Judas and the Black Messiah coming out, this film. Are you at the point where you're picking and choosing what you're doing, or what are you up to next? How are you choosing your projects?
I'm very particular about the projects. I take part in, just because I know how difficult it is for anyone to get a movie made. So I know that if I'm going to be a part of something, I should love that thing, because I want to be able to give everything I have to it, to, in respect to the creators, to the storytellers, to everybody who's involved. So I'm very blessed to be in a position where I get to look at certain things and say yes to that and no to that. But also being very selective is not, I was talking about this earlier about how lucky I am that I get to be able to be a part of some of the greatest stuff out there. I really do. I don't know what I earned it in my past life, apparently, because I genuinely, am blessed to be a part of some of the best stuff. So, I am very, I am selective, but I'm also very blessed, and those two things go hand in hand. But yeah, it's a lot of good stuff, on the horizon that I'm really excited about, and just happy to continue to be a part of like great stories and work with great storytellers.
Can I ask a backstory question, Darrell? Because I know it's a fascinating, piece of your biography that the, that first, big break for you comes in The Wire, working with David Simon, and sort of like walking in, auditioning that, landing it, like boom, you're launched. Kind of a miracle opening. What was you like? What led you to that point? What's the 5 minutes or 5 years or whatever it is before that leads to that moment?
A lot of not knowing what I was going to do, a little bit directionless, as they say, and not thinking about. I never even thought about acting as a profession. It was something that my mother and my brother, one of my older brothers, are cinephiles, but I watch movies. It's more sports for me. So I wanted to go to the NBA, and here I am. So that didn't work out. But no, I just really, it was, I was blessed to have a family friend of ours who has since passed away. He was like an uncle to me. His name was David Mills, and he wrote on The Wire, and he was a writer. And so he was like, I can get you an audition. I can't get you a part. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So sure, and I literally went in there, and I had like a 1-day role, a 1-day part. It was a co-star. It was like Drug Mule or something like that, and I did it, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and I was like, all right, well, that's the end of that. And then I got a call back to audition for 2 separate roles, and one was like Sandwich Boy and something else. And in the audition, I'll never forget, it said that he flips a table, the character, and like in the audition, I like flipped the table and jumped over at the casting director, and they were like, what the hell was that? They were like, don't ever do that again. They were like, that was amazing. And I was like, well, it's been fun acting. It's over. But then I got a call back that they loved me so much that they wanted to make me a character on the show. So yeah, I guess, flipping tables and
that's the key.
Jumping
that's
over
the key. Flip the damn table.
That's it. You gotta do something bold, but I don't recommend that, what I did at all. But
you've got a room full of actors here, gonna be flipping tables all over town.
I know.
As soon as they can get in and actually flip a table, it's all.
That's true. If
So
you're on your
at home,
Zoom, you can flip your own table. This is a good time to be flipping tables.
So we have a question from Janine. How difficult was it to create the time period of the world with like old phones, sneaker culture, etc.?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I remember jokingly saying early on to the producers, like, well, this is going to cost more money because it's a period piece. And they're looking at me like, what? Like, what kind of hustle is this? But I was like, no, it is a period piece, right? It's not right now. It's sort of just before right now. And so the level of like the tech alone, for the people, this is one of those stories that people either are like totally geeked on the story and know all about it, or they're like, yeah, I think I maybe heard that and don't know it. But for those people who do, I knew you gotta be like spot on with the accuracy of it. So it was like sourcing the old phones, sourcing old laptops, going through, and then, making sure that they worked, which is, as we all know, colossal pain in the ass on set. But I wanted it to have the ability to kind of have that real-time interactivity to it and not necessarily do it all with green screens afterwards. So there was a lot of that. And then, as the site, as Silk Road evolved from underground brokers and whatever, when Darrell's character Rayford first clocks it, and hips Jason to it, to the way the interface with the site evolves over time. All of that stuff was taken from screen grabs that were entered into the evidentiary record. So then we had to kind of map the timeline against, okay, where was this in the life of Silk Road? So there was a tremendous amount of, fine tooth comb on all that, which, people could say like, well, who gives a shit? Does it really matter? The point is you're buying dope on the internet. But for those people that do, that know it intimately, it was important to sort of hew to that accuracy.
Another question from Jan. Do you think that Ross's original motivation was money or simple intellectual pursuit, as happens with many computer brainiacs? My read on the character is, because I had asked, like I said, I had his ex-girlfriend, Julia V, as a consultant on the movie. And one of the first questions that I had for her was like, I was like, the whole libertarian, like bomb the system thing, was that like some bullshit that came up afterwards that was, the public sort of mask of this guy? And she was like, literally from like day one of meeting this guy, that was what drove him and animated him in a fundamental way. This notion that sort of personal freedom and the rights of liberty, right? And so that, I think, is an animating impulse. And then I think there's also just something that all of us can relate to in some way or another, or many of us maybe can relate to in some way or another, which is like, I want to make my mark in the world. I think it is that intellectual curiosity where it's, I want to leave something behind. And somewhere along the way, the purity of that intention ends up becoming a Frankenstein monster that grabs him by the throat by the end of it. Mm-hmm. Can you speak a bit about how much the structure of the film did or did not change from script to production to post?
Yeah, it's a great question. There were, innumerable drafts of the script, 70 drafts of the script or something. And so the script, even though like I tend to write very fast and get it down initially and then work it and rework it, as you go. And then by the time you get in there, then, you get an actor like Darrell or like Nick or like Jason, who's like, hey, I know you spent a long time on this. I don't want to be just changing things for changing things, but like this word matters to me. Or like, I remember Darrell being like, this is a Baltimore thing. And I was like, oh, anywhere where there's a Baltimore thing, you're a Baltimore guy, play the Baltimore of it. And so tweak that. And so then those script adjustments happen again, as we're on the day and sort of leading up to it. And then once we got into the edit, what we found out was we had shot kind of a lot of movie. The first cut was 3+ hours long, and there's probably, 10, 12 scenes that got dropped entirely that were like great, fantastic scenes. I think Darrell probably still wants to strangle me for this day. Like the most amazing scene ever was when that ended up getting cut, was when he and Jason go into this bank to like turn the Bitcoin into money, and he just ran away with the scene. And it was just, the entire crew was just literally like in hysterics. It was like, dude, shut up. You guys are blowing the take laughing so hard because he was so on fire. But then when we got in there into the edit, we realized, A, this has got to come down and be a 2-hour movie. And B, there are things that if we were doing the 10-episode version of this, that has to live in there. But by the time it's the compressed 2-hour movie, it can't, or it's throwing off the narrative drive. So there were those changes. And then an interesting change, just by way of a specific thing, cut me off, by the way, if I'm boring you or telling you things that are not interesting or that you already know. But the opening of the film, the editor came to me one day and he was like, here's the deal. You have to ask a question at the top of every movie that, whether the audience realizes it or not, the journey of the entire movie is answering that question. And so he had cut this scene, and in the scene, it was when Ross is in the library leading up to the arrest, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and I guess we don't know this at the time, but it's Jason calling, right? And I think Jimmy Simpson says, who the fuck is that calling him? And like, it's a simple question. Who is that calling him? But it's enough that like, that actually is the journey, that it is the question that defines the entire movie. So that was something that was completely crafted in the edit. And the editor came to me and he's like, I know you didn't write this. This is the top of your movie. Trust me. And I watched it and I was like, you're absolutely right.
So I think someone's asking for a director's cut with Darrell's big scene in it. Or
it's so great. It killed me. And I remember talking to him after. It was like I could tell he was ready to strangle me.
Yeah, whoever asked that question, amazing question. Where is that director's cut? No,
on the extras. Well, I think we've got to wrap things up here. We're almost at the end. I wish I could get in the rest of these questions, but I know everyone is at least saying thank you to you guys for doing this. Congratulations on the film. It's a blast, super interesting. And on behalf of the foundation, I want to thank you all for sharing your process and for your craft. And thanks to the audience for participating as well. Everybody go see the movie, tell your friends about the movie, and
I would like to say one thing, Michael. I don't know if there's any actors who are in the room, but if you are, like, just please keep at it. Do not let anybody throw you off of your path, because it is your path and it is destined for you. And you will hear no's, but do not let those no's deter you from where you are headed. You are very special. Keep creating, keep being you. This industry needs you, and never forget how amazing you are.
Well said, man.
Well said. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys.
You.
Take care. Stay safe.
You too.